What comes into your mind when you think about drylands? An image of a dusty, windswept landscape? A place where it is hard to survive, let alone thrive? This podcast series may just change your mind. Welcome to Dynamic Drylands, the podcast from SPARC. SPARC is a research program which looks into the future of the drylands of Africa and the Middle East. The podcast is hosted by Bola Mosuro.
Hello, I'm Bola Mosuro, a journalist and broadcaster, and I've been reporting on this part of the world for the past 30 years. In this series, I've been speaking with pastoralists, researchers, innovators and aid workers to find out more about the fast-changing pace of life in the drylands. And I'm asking, what needs to change to help herders and farmers better navigate the challenges they face in the long term?
This is Episode 4, Inventiveness and Innovation in the Drylands.
Welcome to this fourth and final episode of Dynamic Drylands. There have been so many fascinating subjects I've covered in my work as a journalist, and a recurring theme in the drylands, which has stood out in the news cycle, has been the stories of herders and farmers. Yet the narrative has often focused on these groups' vulnerabilities. Well, I hope this series has shown how inventive, resilient, and adaptable these farmers and herders are. I've spoken to experts about the rapidly altering drylands and how pastoralists, agro-pastoralists and farmers are an integral part of the food chain in Africa. Their work is a critical part of regional economies and one of the most sustainable ways to meet people's food needs in Africa and the Middle East. We've also heard how development workers, aid agencies and governments must have an appreciation and respect for local knowledge and systems, supporting what is already working and listening to farmers and herders about what it is they actually need. New and frequent challenges also require new approaches. And that's what this episode is all about. I've been curious to find out more about some of the innovative strategies and systems that have been developed in the drylands and how they're helping people navigate new uncertainties. Dr. Diba Wako spoke eloquently in episode 3 about the kinds of difficulties he remembers facing as a young herder.
By the time I left herding at the age of 14 and a half, I was like a 3-day walk away from the main home. Bola, I have seen heaven and I've seen hell. Back then, heaven was much more frequent than hell. The rangeland will just blossom, green and fantastic, livestock in fantastic body condition, and all we live on is milk. That's my heaven. But then it doesn't last like 5 to 7 years or so, and then you move into cycles of hell, which is basically drought, stench of death everywhere. It's what I would say, if not hell, very close to hell. Pastoralists are kind of trapped, they are neither in the past nor in the future.
Like Diba Wako, Joshua Liza is a former cattle herder who trained to become an economist. Here he shares that the relationship with the family's animals was more than just economic.
And I came from the Maasai communities whose pride is cattle. Without cattle, we are nothing at the Maasai. There was even a time that we claimed that all cattle in the world belongs to the Maasai. So apart from the education, I think everything now I know is all about pastoralism, is all about cattle.
Today, Joshua combines his economic and scientific expertise with his expertise as a cattle herder in order to work on innovations that help tend animals. We'll hear more from Joshua later. Diba Wako now directs the regional livestock program for the international NGO Mercy Corps. His projects use innovative methods to keep livestock healthy and to reduce diseases. I asked Diba what innovations are being developed that he thinks are important.
Okay, there are many under discussion, but there's one we are about to roll out, and this is using public-private partnership approach to provide routine livestock vaccination. Livestock vaccinations have always been carried out on emergency basis. So this failed to protect animals because disease is already present in the animals. Animals are stressed. It can only help to contain the disease in a certain area. So what we are saying is, why don't we use the public and donor funding to build the infrastructure, such as crashes where animals are vaccinated, such as cold chain facilities, and make sure that this infrastructure is in place for use by the private sector to provide vaccination services. Because most vaccines are actually affordable. What is not affordable is when you have a disease strike the livestock and then animals die and you lose that animal. So we are saying pastoralists would end up buying these vaccines and private sector would end up providing profitable services for them, profitable for them and profitable for the pastoralists. And so this is one innovation we are about to roll out in northern Kenya before scaling it up to Somalia and also Ethiopia.
And is it a project that has brought everybody on board, not just NGOs and governments, but also private sources too?
Yes, rolling it out still requires effort of the development partners, government, and the private sector actors. Private sector actors, there's a reason as to why they are not providing vaccination services. The reason is it's provided by donors and governments, but they are not. It's not done sufficiently. It's never done to the required level of coverage, and so I have seen pastoral herder coming to me complaining, veterinarians vaccinated my animals last week or last month, and today they are dying of diseases. They don't even know what they are vaccinated against because the way we are approaching it is very wrong. Actually, somebody just comes to the village and says, bring your animals, we want to vaccinate for you. You inject animals, something, and you move away. The pastoralists don't know even what they were protected against, what they are not protected against. And so they are frustrated and they blame the entire vaccine infrastructure because they believe it doesn't work. We have created actually a bad image. And so we are trying to work with the private sector, with the government and other development actors to change this perception and practically demonstrate that vaccination routinely done can protect livestock.
How is it done then if you don't then just come in and say, okay, we want to corral your cattle and vaccinate them? How do you know which vaccine to roll out?
It's all about participation and inclusion and people awareness that people have. So what you do, all you need to do is you work with the livestock keepers and profile the diseases that are prevalent there, and then come up with a calendar together and say, these diseases have all vaccines that can protect your animals against these diseases. So let's vaccinate them at this time against this, and this. And so they fully know what's going on. And that way, then they would make informed choices. Otherwise, they have no idea. Some even believe, one vaccine will probably protect the entire animal against entire range of diseases that would arise. So it's just all about that clarity and working together with pastoralists.
So as Dibba said there, the best innovations are those which give people choices, allowing them to strengthen or diversify their existing practices. These innovations don't have to be driven by NGOs or governments. Mobile phones and social media are also generating new ways of coping with crises within communities. I spoke about this with Dr. Tahira Mohammed. She's a postdoctoral researcher from northern Kenya. And she knows about the solidarity within pastoral families because of her own pastoral family heritage and the innovations she witnessed within the community, particularly from women.
I am actually born in northern Kenya, a place called Moyale, which is in Marsabit County. 70% of the population are pastoralists in that county. I was in urban, not in town, so I was schooling and I wasn't involved so much in herding or in pastoral livelihood. But my grandparents are livestock owners, so at least I'll get opportunity to go visit them over the holiday and see how pastoralists live. So my relationship is actually because of me being born and raised there, and also having done my study there. I worked with pastoralists for longer term during my PhD. That time I was looking at how pastoral social safety net, the aspect of solidarity, help people survive through different crises, including drought, conflict, animal disease, and everyday crises.
When we talk about pastoral communities, we usually think about, or people usually think about the men, because they're the ones who are tending to the livestock, as opposed to the women. What kind of a role have you seen and what can you describe for us in terms of women?
Women are the backstone, women are the cornerstone of this pastoral production, because they are not seen as actively managing livestock, but they are the ones who are managing the resources that come from livestock management. For instance, from the research that I did in Isiolo, women engage in milk production, so they are the ones who take the milk from the farm, they process it and send it to the market in Nairobi. Not just marketing the milk, but then using the resources from that milk marketing to run the household, to manage the family, to school their children, to even pay the herders who herd the animals, to buy feeds for the animals. So male are the owners in terms of the herd owners, but the critical managers and who are not even recognized and also rewarded are women who are very much involved in all the production and also in all the activities. I remember a quote from my study where an elder was saying, without these women, this livelihood will not even proceed from one drought season to another. So I think they are highly forgotten, but they really play a significant role in ensuring that the families have source of income.
And in that sense, it's then women are key when we're talking about innovations. Can you describe about some of the innovations, especially when you talk about even the social safety net?
I'll give you two scenarios. One for women who are connected to urban center. That means they have access to digital technology like mobile phones. They can use mobile money transfer. They can use mobile communication, and they can use motorized form of transport to sell their milk and also get connected to market. That is one case scenario. And these people are highly embedded in this digital technology. They're using it smartly to send money to even sometimes someone is based in Isiolo and they're selling their milk in Nairobi without necessarily meeting their consumer. They get their money through their mobile phone. So this technology strengthened their network. That is number one. And number two, a case of women who are not connected to urban center. They live in a place where there's no mobile network, there's no electricity, and there is very limited means of transport. So how do they innovate? So there is this place called Bori in northern Kenya's Marsabit, Moyale sub-county. So this group of women, 5 neighbors band together, they form a mini group. They send one person with the milk to go to now Moyale town to sell the milk. The person who is going today, what they do is they save the proceeds from the milk sales in that shop. There's a particular centralized shop in Moyale. So they come at the end month and then take their money. So they use their network, and in this network, what drives the network is trust. So there's trust among the 5 group of women, and also there's that trust from the shopkeeper. So the shopkeeper has a record book whereby he put, for example, Alex has this number of money with me, and then Tahira has this money. End month, so the women can come and get their money. For example, they can make up to $100 or $200, whatever the sales is. So it is through this kind of, relying on network and relationship that they're able to access market, which they could not have accessed. And also to save in the cost and the labor, they don't go all of them together at once. So if it is my turn today, I will collect milk from all the 5 women and send it to the market, bring the cash or anything, or even wait for the end month for them to get the cash. So it's through this local network and forms of solidarity, innovate on how they can make sure that they access market, which they cannot under normal circumstances.
Well, Tahira has also seen homegrown systems at work that have transformed a traditional system to work well in the 21st century. Harambee, which is Swahili for pulling together, is a Kenyan tradition that relies on unity within the community. People unite to help one another, and in times of crisis, pastoralists also rely on this age-old system. Tahira has seen this adapted by women in Isiolo in Kenya in order to help them cope when faced with hardship.
Nowadays, it is becoming innovative because through mobile group or even WhatsApp or something like that, they are able to reach diaspora people. Like, for example, I live in Nairobi. I've been contributing in too many harambes. So-and-so lost livestock, so-and-so's son is going to school, so-and-so's, because of that connection, the people in rural area are getting publicizing their need for harambe, and they're also reaching diaspora people, which makes it bring the remittances and also support back to community. And I think people have survived really on that. It's the aspect of maximizing and also reaching wider audience that is making it slightly innovative. The new way is also it is making the connection very diverse, because traditionally it used to be clan-based transfer. But because of the wider outreach and the wider audience through networks, people are supported by diverse communities. Sometimes I am from Gabra, I am from Burji or different community, but I can support because it's a form of social solidarity.
And that's all thanks to smartphones and these women using the power of social media and the internet. It's no difference to the massive changes the internet has brought to other people's lives globally. The smartphone has quickened the pace of many daily interactions phenomenally, and those in the drylands are showing why they won't be left behind. Meanwhile, Libya has the world's third highest use of social media.
You're listening to Dynamic Drylands, the podcast about supporting change in the drylands.
Someone who has a finger on the pulse of digital tech in the drylands is Alexis Thier. She's a researcher with Mercy Corps based in Kenya, and she monitors the take-up and social impact of new technology by pastoralists.
Other wonderful researchers have studied the incredible inventiveness and grace that pastoralists have adopted this tool, belated as it has been in their communities. In many cases, it's often the first contact certain communities, especially the most rural, have with what we'd call a modern form of technology. And excitingly, I think the adaptiveness, to me, is reflective of what pastoralists are in fact known for. They know how to assess risk and quickly adapt. They're flexible in this way. And so really, despite what might be in the general sense of bias towards pastoralists and technology as Luddites, it is in fact should be no surprise that they've been so thoughtful, so creative in adapting the mobile phone. And then my argument is that it's not only the mobile phone, an important corollary to that is social media platforms in pastoralist communities.
So when you're then talking about how you've seen the use, what lessons can be learned? Are you then, and are tech builders and also those in the NGO communities able to see and adapt and hone in on?
So many. I think three interlinked insights for me from what we're observing so far. Number one is just the basic observation that, wow, there are a lot of pastoralists on social media. Even there's a Facebook group. This is just one example, 75,000 members, which is fantastic to think about. So the second thing is, now, given there's so many pastoralists on these platforms, I became very curious what exactly is exciting to them, what are they benefiting from? And so that's essentially to describe the behavior that we're observing. So far, the data is a bit scattered and hard to parse, but there seems to be more pastoralists actively involved in these platforms than purpose-built platforms. And when I say purpose-built, is I have a company and I decide then I want to have this one focused tool for example, helping you sell your goats. Those are having a harder time convincing people to use them. But the third thing I think is that pastoralists could be wonderful to teach us on humane technology as a whole, not just to serve them better and their needs better in their context. So for example, what does it look like to build a tool that does not require someone is always online? So I think there's a lot to be learned, and this was the third point, on generally responsible technology as a whole. For example, a simple thing is like M-Pesa is mobile money in Kenya. It's either you pick Kiswahili or English. There's meanwhile, it's a country with many other languages. And you'll find when you go on the social media platforms, people are mixing languages. You'll speak Borana, you'll speak whatever works best for you. If you're in northern Nigeria, and you often move, for example, to Cameroon, you want to be able to switch. So all of that is to say, from the simple things of language design and how it doesn't allow for creolizing in technology to much more important things like building a tool that works across like variable networks. I think they have so much to teach us.
What do you think is the major challenge when we're talking about innovation and the pastoral communities?
My sense is it's primarily structural. I think the first thing is I don't think the evangelization is quite necessary at this point. I think the results speak for themselves. Even the demographics of the people on a lot of these groups, the age is varying, the degree of rural versus peri-urban and urban varies significantly. So I think people are sold on what is possible with very little evangelization. I think my sense of the challenges to ensure, one, that we don't replicate the inequalities that exist offline. So, for example, for younger pastoralists who are using social media to supplement or diversify their income, how do we ensure that they are not prey to a lot of the exploitative practices that have been pointed out in other markets that continue to affect their peers? The second thing is, how do we systematize and ensure that there is at least a higher minimum of connectivity in a lot of these places? So it shouldn't be the case that, for example, you're a pastoralist and you're in the Serengeti, and then when you move up across Kenya, you no longer have access to key things that have become central to your way of life. I think the third thing is an important one that we're finding is on costs. I think that's related to the second one, but I think I wanted to touch on the question of crackdowns. I think we've had issues around governments shutting down the internet, and so far the effect of that is mostly focused on urban or sedentary populations. But I think for people whose livelihoods have become fundamentally reliant on staying connected, they are most affected and least represented in conversations about what it means for advocacy, what it means for their livelihoods to be sustained.
Alexis Thier there. Like Tahira, Alexis has seen how inventive pastoralists and others are in their use of their phones. They're not shy or reluctant to take on new technology. The fact that they can stay connected and communicate with others far away, no matter how remote they are, is crucial. Working alongside the Research to Action program of SPARC, Alexis has monitored which innovations are working in the drylands. One of them is Afre Scout. This is a digital system which uses satellite imagery in order to transmit information about suitable grazing areas to herders. Joshua Liza is a community engagement consultant at Afre Scout, and we heard him at the beginning of this episode sharing what cattle means to him. Raised within a Maasai pastoral family from Tanzania's Ngorongoro district, he looked after cattle before and after school. Today, he's an economist and an innovator, and he's able to appreciate how Afre Scout can be so helpful.
Well, Afre Scout, we call it a shepherd in the eye on the sky because of their satellite now, which is we are trying to connect with the indigenous knowledge at the ground. Afre Scout equipped the pastoral people with the digital insight and their training and practice that help them, first of all, to fast track, locate the best pastures for the animals and water sources for the animals, which saves time but also saves the animal from dying. Despite having the technology component, the Afre Scout was designed by the community themselves through sitting with their traditional leaders. And we came together and put into an application that helped now them be able to locate where they can find the better pastures for the animals, where they can find water. So that is what whole Afre Scout is about.
It's quite fascinating when you talk about it, Joshua, because marrying that technology, the digital age, with indigenous traditional practices, how the shepherds who may not even have had or may not still have a smartphone, how are they able to work with this digitalization? Could you talk about that aspect, please?
Well, the end of 2015 to 2016, before we come up with an application, we had the physical map printed, satellite map printed every after 10 days, and then we supply to the local office at the pastoral communities. But later on, we came to realize that within let's say 20 households, we might find at least 3 to 5 smartphones at the compounds. Now we have these maps distributed to these people who have the smartphone at the communities, and they can transmit this information to their local traditional leaders so that the pastoral communities can have access of these maps. This is how it works. In every 10 days, we compile all the satellite imagery for a certain location. And then at every 10 days, they are informed that the new maps are available, where they can download, and they can now see what is the change that has happened within the gap of 10 days.
It's wonderful. And as well as seeing the aerial picture of these grazing lands, I know that in some communities, they depend on their smartphones to get grain, the price of grain. Is the smartphone also used in that way by the pastoralists?
Yes, absolutely. When we first introduced Afre Scout, we were only focusing on the pastoral communities. But it was amazing that even the people who are not the pastoral communities started using Afre Scout, because the features of Afre Scout, including the distance from one area to another, it shows the landscape itself, the routes that the people can take, but also it gives them the room to share several alerts, including the weather alerts, including the outbreak of these diseases, and the other so many other alerts. Just for example, back in my town, there was a time that a motorcycle was stolen. But just imagine it was found through the Afre Scout. Someone posted an alert on Afre Scout, and it was caught at the border of Kenya and Tanzania. So you can imagine how this amazing application have changed the people from the pastoral communities to the even non-pastoral communities. So when right now, as we are Afre Scout, one of the components that we're trying now to develop and compile within the Afre Scout application is about having several pages, one including a certain page where the pastoral communities can learn the basic about certain diseases that is happening, maybe the common diseases around their area. But also, it is our collaboration with Google is also to use AI to determine the exactly weight, or at least approximation on the weight of the live animal, because sometimes another challenge that these communities face is the ability for them to determine the price of their animals. Now they can take a picture and put the kind of the breed that they have, and at least come up to the nearest exactly weight of the animals, and be able to determine how much they can benefit from their animals at the market prices.
Joshua Liza. Well, just like the apps that we use on our phones, apps like Afre Scout collate data, then provide services which speed up processes for the users. It truly is the shepherd's eye in the sky, blending the old with the new. And Joshua also embodies that perfect combination. He blends the use of the latest satellite technology with his scientific background and his first-hand experience as a young herder. He's able to see the areas that are ripe for innovation because of his understanding of the importance of local knowledge. In fact, it's Joshua, Tahira, Dibba and Sali from episode 2 who really embody the dynamic drylands. They epitomize the resilience, the persistence and adaptability of farming and herding communities in this harsh and fast-changing environment. Whether from the Sahel across parts of West and Central Africa, the rangelands in East and the Horn of Africa, or the Arabian Peninsula, pastoralists, farmers and agro-pastoralists have a history of bouncing back from shocks. In this 4-part mini-series, we try to show you more about the challenges and new uncertainties that those living in the drylands face. While headlines may focus on droughts or floods or struggles over natural resources, these crises are not happening in a vacuum. They're taking place in remote or conflict-affected areas, among people who've been historically marginalized, maligned, or left out of decision-making processes. This marginalization, combined with decades of conflict, state fragility, wrong-footed development interventions, and underinvestment, have made people in the drylands more vulnerable to shocks. The drylands may be an unlikely breadbasket, but the truth is they make up a critical part of the food needs and economies of countries across Africa and the Middle East. Helping the people who live there to deal with these new uncertainties is critical. For those aid agencies, development bodies, and governments that want to assist these communities, and I dare say there are a number of you listening to this series, it's important to consider what we think we know about effective aid in the drylands. Are we responding to real problems, or just the problems we'd like to solve? And what is it that farmers and herders themselves say they need? Ultimately, there are no silver bullet solutions, but there is plenty of innovation happening in the drylands. From apps like Afre Scout, which is providing that shepherd's eye in the sky for pastoralists to find grazing areas, or changes in the way people insure against disasters, or the way they support each other through crises. I've heard from people who are fighting at the grassroots to make change happen, such as Sali Sadonana's Nigerian-based NGO Fudeco, which is helping to resolve farmer-herder conflicts. And I talked to researchers at the ODI, ILRI, Mercy Corps and elsewhere who are reframing what effective aid and investment looks like in the drylands, considering everything from what secure land tenure means for a pastoralist to how to deal with tricky cross-border issues. The point isn't to preserve or change pastoralism and farming in the drylands completely. It's about understanding what people need, supporting those systems or processes which are already working, and ultimately giving people the tools to choose how they respond to shocks. And we've also heard quite emphatically, those living in the drylands are not afraid of technological breakthroughs or innovations to improve their lot and that of their animals. The key is giving more choice. I'm Bola Mosuro. Thanks for listening to Dynamic Drylands, and thanks to everyone who's taken part in this series.
Dynamic Drylands is produced by Loftus Media for SPARC, which is supporting pastoralism and agriculture in recurrent and protracted crises. SPARC aims to inform more effective policies and investments in the drylands of Africa and the Middle East. It is commissioned by the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and is managed by Cowater International in partnership with Mercy Corps, ODI, and the International Livestock Research Institute. Thank you to everyone who contributed to this series. For more information about the issues discussed in this podcast, visit the links in the show notes.